When did your biggest critic realize they owed you everything? My son turned 8 last Saturday, and his mom threw him this huge party at her parents' house with bouncy castles and a magician. Probably 50 people there. I showed up with my gift wrapped in newspaper, because I couldn't afford wrapping paper, and my ex-wife's sister actually laughed out loud when she saw it. Her husband pulled me aside and said I should be embarrassed showing my face here when everyone knows I'm 3 months behind on child support, and asked if I even knew what grade he was in. I wanted to tell him that I actually knew his teacher personally, because I'd been volunteering at his school every lunch hour, but instead, I just stood there and took it, because arguing would just make everything worse for my boy. The whole party was basically 2 hours of my ex-wife's family taking turns humiliating me while I tried to stay invisible near the fence. Her mom kept making these loud comments about how some fathers actually provide for their children, and her dad walked past me carrying my son's new bike and said maybe someday I could afford to buy my child something that didn't come from a thrift store. When they brought out the cake and my son wanted me to stand next to him for photos, his grandmother literally stepped in front of me and said they wanted pictures with people who were actually part of his life. I watched my boy's face fall, and it took everything in me not to say something, but I knew they'd just use it against me in court. My ex-wife's aunt asked me directly in front of everyone if I was still working that pathetic warehouse job, or if I'd been fired from that too, and when I said I was still there, she said, at least my son would learn what not to become. My ex-wife stood there telling her cousins that I lived in some disgusting studio apartment and probably spent my child support money on beer, while her sister nodded along and said, some people just aren't meant to be fathers, and that's okay. That's when a gray sedan pulled up, and this exhausted-looking woman got out carrying a thick folder and walking straight through the party toward me like everyone else was invisible. She looked distressed and said she was sorry, but this couldn't wait another day because the state was threatening to pull the placement if she didn't get the inspection done immediately. My ex-wife's mom immediately stepped forward and demanded to know who this woman was and what the hell she was talking about. The woman said she was from Child Protective Services, and she needed to inspect my home for the foster placement renewal and verify the twins were still thriving. My ex-wife's sister went completely white and whispered, what twins? The social worker flipped through her papers and said she was talking about the emergency placement from 14 months ago after the mother was arrested, and the state couldn't locate any willing family members. We placed them with the only relative who answered our calls, she said, looking at me, even though he wasn't even legally required to take them since they're not his biological family. My ex-wife's sister started shaking, and her voice broke when she asked what the mother's name was. The social worker checked her file and said the biological mother's name, and my ex-wife's sister screamed, those are my babies! The entire party went silent, and the social worker looked between us confused and said, you told us you had no family when we arrested you. My ex-wife's sister was sobbing and said she'd told them that because she was ashamed and thought the kids would be better off in a nice foster home than with anyone who knew what she'd become. I've been sending letters to the group home, she kept saying over and over. They told me they were in a group home in the next state. The social worker shook her head and said the state had traced family through records and found me listed as an emergency contact at the kids' daycare from 2 years ago, and I was the only person who'd answered when they called. He never mentioned knowing you, the social worker said, staring at the sister. Just said they were family and he'd take them. My ex-wife asked why I never said anything and why I let them all think I was broke because I was lazy. Because she told everyone she was clean, I said loud enough for the whole party to hear. And I couldn't expose her relapse without destroying her chance at getting them back. The social worker started listing everything I'd been doing, including working 3 jobs and sleeping on the floor so the twins could have the only bed in my apartment, and taking 4 buses to work after selling my car for their therapy. The little girl didn't speak for 11 months, the social worker said, looking right at my ex-wife's sister. But last week she finally said her first word, and it was his name because he's the only stable thing those babies have known. My ex-wife's sister collapsed to her knees and crawled toward me saying she was sorry over and over, while her husband just stood there like someone had unplugged him. Her mom asked how long I'd been hiding this, and the social worker said 14 months without a single day off, and that she'd tried to get me to accept help, but I'd refused because I didn't want the state to think I couldn't handle it. This man hasn't bought himself new shoes in a year, the social worker said loudly enough for everyone to hear, because your grandchildren needed occupational therapy that insurance wouldn't cover. The entire party was staring at me. I told the social worker we could do the inspection tomorrow and started to leave, but my ex-wife grabbed my arm and said, wait, please just wait, but I was already walking to the bus stop.